They denied a black colonel's flight while he escorted a fallen soldier's remains. They regretted it. Don't forget to subscribe to the Stories of Life's Acts channel. And before we continue this story, let us know where you are from. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe as we release videos every day at 12:30 p.m. It was a June morning, and the weak sunlight filtered through the airport windows at Atlanta International. Colonel James Caldwell stood upright, closing his eyes for a moment, as if to enjoy the fresh air before stepping into the long flight ahead. In his hands was a small, sturdy wooden box containing one of the most important missions of his career, the remains of a soldier who had fallen in battle. He was escorting the body of Aaron Walker, a young soldier, only 22 years old, who had died while protecting his comrades in a fierce battle in Iraq. James was no longer a young recruit joining the military. He had served in the United States Army for over 20 years, rising from an eager young officer to a colonel, earning the respect of both his peers and superiors. However, the wars of the past seemed to be indelible in his mind. Though he could endure the hardships of his job, nothing hurt him more than bringing a fellow soldier's body home from the battlefield, especially when it was someone he had fought alongside. As he walked past the check-in counters, James clearly felt the difference between himself and the other passengers. They moved quickly, standing in line to check in with a sense of urgency, while James seemed to carry more weight, each step feeling like the burden of a mental load that could not easily be discarded. He looked down at the wooden box, his heart heavy. This wasn't just about bringing a soldier back home. It was a meaningful journey, one that showed respect for the fallen. When he reached the check-in counter, he presented his ticket and explained the reason he was carrying the small box. The attendant barely glanced at James's ticket and casually picked up the phone to double-check the information. At that moment, James noticed a slight discomfort in the attendant's attitude. The attendant looked at him, said nothing, simply nodded, and continued with the task. James thought little of it. But when the attendant handed back the ticket and briefly announced something, everything suddenly changed. "I am sorry, sir, you cannot board this flight," the attendant said, her tone flat, but her gaze lacked respect. "Your seat is unavailable, and we cannot rearrange it at this moment." James was stunned. He tried to stay calm, but his heart began to race. An indescribable feeling surged within him. He was a colonel in the military, a soldier with years of experience. He had fought in battles, protected his country, and now he was escorting the remains of a soldier who had given his life for that very country. But things weren't as simple as that. Thousands of soldiers had sacrificed their lives, but to them, James was just a black soldier. And today it seemed that this distinction was present right here in the airport. "I am sorry, but I cannot accept this," James said firmly. "I am on a military duty. This flight is very important to me." The attendant remained cold and unyielding. "I am very sorry, but you will have to wait for another flight." James began to feel his patience tested. He sighed and tried to explain further, but the attendant did not change her stance. It was as if he were a nuisance, an unimportant customer in their eyes. He couldn't believe this was happening at a time when all he wanted was to fulfill his duty to a fallen comrade. Finally, James felt a deep sense of frustration. He couldn't understand why they were treating him this way, not because of the disrespectful behavior, but because of the racism evident in every word and glance from the attendant. Though a surge of anger rose within him, he made a conscious effort to remain calm, knowing that reacting with anger would only escalate the situation. Before leaving the check-in counter, James called his superior, a longtime friend from the military. He recounted the situation, expressing his dissatisfaction with how he had been treated. The explanations from his superior did little to ease the pain in his heart. But at least they promised to help him resolve the issue. The feeling of being treated like an invisible person still haunted James, but he knew he could not give up. Things had to change. This flight was not just a regular trip. It was a journey of respect, not only for the soldier who had fallen, but also for everything James had been protecting throughout his military career. James walked away from the check-in counter, his heart heavy, his chest tight with disappointment. He looked back at the small wooden box containing the body of young soldier Aaron Walker, a soldier who had given his life for his country, a brother in arms. The feeling of not being able to accept the way he was treated surged within him. He wondered why his efforts, his sacrifices, and those of his comrades were judged by the color of his skin rather than by his qualities and duty. But even though he felt hurt, James knew he could not give up. He had faced harsher challenges on the battlefield, and an airport employee could not bring him down. However, the treatment he had just received was no small matter. It wasn't just a personal incident, it was a reflection of a deeper issue in society. Racism still existed in every aspect of life, even in places where people thought it had no place. James returned to the check-in counter, this time not to explain himself, but to request to speak to the superior of the employee who had refused him. The attendant seemed slightly surprised, but maintained her cold demeanor. James felt as though he were being tested, not only by his job, but also by the invisible prejudices he had to fight throughout his life. "Could you please wait a moment?" the attendant said in a lackluster tone before turning away. James stared at him but did not speak, simply standing there in silence. He was used to this feeling, a feeling he didn't want, but one he still had to endure. After a few minutes, a middle-aged woman who appeared to be the airport manager approached. She looked at James unfriendly, but at least she was not as cold as the previous attendant. James looked up, trying to keep his emotions in check. "I am a soldier, and I am on a mission to escort the remains of a fallen soldier," he said, his tone firm but respectful. "I request to board this flight. If there is an issue with the seat, please let me know." The woman looked at James's ticket once more, then frowned slightly. "I understand your situation, but we cannot change the seating policy. A different arrangement is necessary." She paused for a moment, then added, "You will need to wait for the next flight." James felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he fought to keep it under control. "I am not requesting a regular seat," he said, his voice resolute. "I am requesting the right to fulfill the duty I have committed to." But then he realized, even if he was in the right, the people standing before him seemed to only see the color of his skin, not the soldier, not the colonel, just a black man standing in front of them. Nothing more. The atmosphere around them grew tense, as if the whole airport was waiting to see what would happen next. James looked at the wooden box, thinking of Aaron Walker, of what the young man had gone through. Only 22 years old, his life had just begun, but for a senseless reason, war, he had been lost. And yet here, in the very country Aaron had sacrificed his life for, James was facing this injustice. Meanwhile, the woman still showed no intention of changing her decision. After a tense silence, James looked at her again, determined not to accept this indifference. "I won't leave here until I am on this flight. Contact your superior." A few more minutes passed, and the manager called a head of customer service. The suffocating atmosphere made James even more restless, but he could not give up. He knew that if he gave in, it would not just be him, but all the soldiers who could face this kind of discrimination in the future. The conversation went on, and eventually the superior of the security officer agreed to take up James's case. They announced that they would resolve the seating issue and put him on the earliest flight possible. While it was a small victory, James knew that the battle had only just begun. The wounds in his heart were still unhealed, but at least today he had won a partial victory. However, even after everything was settled, James could not shake the tension within him. He couldn't accept that a soldier, a man who had fought to protect his country, was treated like this just because of the color of his skin. Such actions continued to happen in society, and James knew the fight for justice was far from over. He walked into the waiting room, no longer looking at the other passengers around him, but only focusing on the wooden box. That was the only image in his mind now, the image of a soldier who had fallen, a soldier who deserved to be respected more than all the prejudices the world placed upon them. As everything gradually settled and James was finally allowed to board the flight, he still could not shake the sense of unease in his heart. Though the incident at the airport had been resolved, what had happened continued to linger with him like an unhealed wound. Sitting in his seat, the dim light from the airplane window illuminated his face. He looked out the window, watching the clouds pass swiftly beneath the pale morning light, but his mind continued to whirl with thoughts that he could not silence. James knew that he could not stand still and accept that discrimination. He understood that it wasn't just out of respect for the fallen soldier, but also for his own dignity and that of his comrades. Part of him always felt that the fight for recognition for people like him, the black soldiers in the military, had become exhausting. But he also knew that battles were not only fought on the battlefield. Sometimes they took place in the hidden corners of life, where discrimination still silently persisted. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, James felt a profound silence enveloping everything around him. Every movement of the plane, every adjustment of the aircraft's parts seemed to transport him into another space, where all the turmoil inside him would slowly be pushed aside. However, the atmosphere inside the plane did little to soothe him. The events at the airport still echoed in his mind, and all he needed to do now was keep himself calm. This flight was not just a simple journey, it was an inner confrontation that James had to overcome. He had long been familiar with the feeling of fighting, but this time it was a battle without weapons, without gunfire, only painful decisions about dignity and respect. Once the plane reached a stable altitude, James decided to call his commanding officer, Colonel Raymond Williams. He had known this friend since he was a second lieutenant and had always received respect from him, not just because of his career, but also because of James's character. Raymond was the person James trusted the most in the military. "Ray, I need some help," James said in a deep but resolute voice. Raymond responded immediately, his tone calm yet filled with concern. "What is going on, James?" James took a deep breath and then recounted everything that had happened at the airport, the rejection he faced, the cold attitude of the security officer, and the feeling of being judged simply because of his skin color. "I can't just sit still and let this continue, Ray. This feeling, I can't bear it." Raymond was silent for a long time, as if he was reflecting on James's account. Then he spoke. "James, I understand how you feel, but we can't let these things destroy us. You know, sometimes fighting is about protecting values greater than ourselves, what we believe in. This isn't the first time you have faced injustice, and it will not be the last." Raymond's words gave James renewed strength. He knew his friend was right. Indeed, there had been times when James had faced racism, both in the military and in life. But this time, standing in the midst of challenges at work and in life, he realized that patience was not about surrendering, but about holding on to his dignity and not allowing himself to break. "Thanks, Ray," James said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the emotions rising inside. "I will handle it." The call ended, but Raymond's words continued to echo in James's mind. He knew that all significant change began with small actions, and if no one stood up, prejudice would remain forever. From that moment on, a strong determination arose in James's heart. He would not let this situation pass without a proper response. Not just for himself, but for all the black soldiers in the military, those who had never been treated fairly, those who were always judged by the color of their skin. They deserved respect, and James was determined to do whatever it took to protect that right. His thoughts became clearer as the plane began its descent. The long wait throughout the flight had finally come to an end. He was preparing to step off the plane, and although the frustration still lingered, James felt stronger than ever. He knew that this journey would not end when Aaron's body was handed over to his family. It would continue, and the actions he took today would create change for tomorrow. Arriving at Aaron's hometown airport, everything had been arranged and ready. However, the anger inside James had not faded. He knew that the fight couldn't always be won immediately, but at least he had done what was right. As the plane touched down, James felt a wave of intense emotion rise within him. Outside the window was a gray sky, dark clouds covering the land below. Yet his mind was not adrift, it was focused. He had faced many challenges in the military, but never had he felt a mission so heavy as this one. He was carrying a purpose not only to honor Aaron Walker, but also to remind everyone that racism still exists, even in places where we hope it does not. After landing, James and his fellow soldiers were warmly received. Soldiers, members of Aaron's family, all were there at the airport. Yet, James still felt a sense of loneliness. He knew that it wasn't just him who had to face this discrimination dash. There were thousands of soldiers, thousands of families in the same situation. He stepped out of the airport doors, heading toward Aaron's family. Aaron's mother, Judith Walker, had been standing there for a long time, her eyes red and swollen, her hands trembling as she tightly gripped a handkerchief. She saw James and nodded to him, a silent expression of deep gratitude, though her eyes were still filled with sorrow for the son she had lost. Everything she was feeling, James could sense deeply. "We will keep our promise to him, Mrs. Judith," James said, his eyes locking with hers. "He will never be forgotten." But in that moment, painful memories flooded James's mind. He looked at the wooden box, now handed over to the staff, and felt the pain of the mother, a pain no words could ever soothe. As a soldier, James knew there could be no replacement for such losses. But at least he had done one small thing, bringing a comrade back home where he belonged. Throughout the process of transporting Aaron's body from the airport, James never left the vehicle carrying the wooden box. The sense of responsibility and respect for his fallen comrade kept him from relaxing. While others around him may have gone back to their homes in peace, James was still in a battle not just to bring Aaron home, but to reconsider the discrimination that he and many other soldiers faced. When they arrived at Aaron's family home, a small ceremony was held. People began to gather, prayers were offered, and the respect for the fallen young soldier could not ease the sorrow in Mrs. Judith's heart. But James knew that in this moment, nothing could replace her loss, and nothing could bring Aaron back. The dark clouds still hung in the sky, just as the sadness lingered in their hearts. At that moment, something unexpected happened. One of the veterans, a longtime friend of James from the war, who had fought alongside him in Iraq, stood up to speak. "James," he said, his voice deep but serious, "I have seen too many people, too many of our black soldiers, endure discrimination, disdain. They deserve respect, but it seems like the world just does not see them for what they truly deserve." His words didn't just strike James's heart, but also awakened everyone present at the ceremony. No one could ignore the truth that in the fight, there were not only weapons, but also mental wars, invisible wounds that no one could see. Black soldiers, no matter who they were, carried burdens that others would never understand. And today, the veteran continued, "I believe James is doing the right thing. He is not just bringing our comrade home. He is fighting for us to be recognized so we will not be forgotten." His speech moved everyone present. Many began discussing racism in the military, in society. Stories were shared, emotions ran high. James felt that this was an important moment, not just for Aaron, but for all black soldiers, those whom society had not fully recognized, but were quietly fighting to prove they deserved respect. During the ceremony, James said nothing more. He just stood silently, listening, feeling the warmth from his friends, comrades, and Aaron's family. The sorrow was still there, but it no longer weighed as heavily. A sense of hope, though small, began to grow within James. He knew that his actions, however small, had made a mark, showing that change could come. And if not today, then someday, a day when all black soldiers, those who sacrificed for the country, would be seen as true heroes without racial discrimination. After the ceremony, although it was late, James could not sleep. The events of the day still swirled in his mind. Every moment, every word, every emotion felt like it had just happened. He felt proud for completing his mission, but couldn't shake the pain from what had happened at the airport, things that didn't just affect him, but all black soldiers in the military, those who sacrificed without receiving proper recognition. Although James's efforts to bring Aaron's body to his family had been acknowledged by many, a part of him still felt unsatisfied. That sense of injustice clung to him like an unhealed wound. James couldn't forget being denied a seat on the flight simply because of his skin color. But what hurt him even more was the regret over something deeper. He had allowed those people, the airport staff, to control his emotions and decisions in a crucial moment when he should have fought harder right then and there. That night, James couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, replaying every detail of the incident at the airport. He kept thinking to himself that he should have stood up stronger, protested more fiercely, and not just stopped at asking to speak to the manager. He remembered the moment when the officer rejected him without hesitation simply because he was black. But instead of reacting forcefully at that time, he had remained silent, unable to fully express the anger that boiled inside him. He felt like he had let them win, even though he knew deep down that he could have done more. It was just one moment, James told himself. If I had stood my ground, I could have changed everything. But his silence had left an indelible mark on his mind, because sometimes silence is not a wise choice, it is an acquiescence to injustice. The quiet night passed, and when the first light of dawn streamed through the window, James knew he had an important decision to make. He couldn't let this go by without finding a way to make it right. The next morning, James decided to call a group of lawyers, specialists in fighting for the rights of those who suffered from racial discrimination. He knew this fight wasn't going to be easy, and if he wanted to create real change, he couldn't do it alone. He needed the support of people who understood the law and had the power to influence society. Furthermore, he felt that without strong action from his side, this injustice would continue to spread. Hello, this is James Blackwood, a soldier on leave. I would like to discuss an incident I experienced at the airport where I was denied boarding a flight with the body of a fallen comrade who sacrificed his life for this country, simply because I am black, James said when the lawyer answered the phone. On the other end of the line, the lawyer was silent for a moment, then responded, "This is a serious issue. We will need the details, James. This is not the first time this has happened, and if you want to make a change, we will help you." The tension in James's chest began to ease. He felt he was no longer alone in this fight. When he hung up the phone, he felt a sense of relief. Sometimes it only takes one person to stand up to make a difference. And James now was not only a soldier, but also someone fighting for justice and equality. After the call with his lawyer, James felt ready to step into this long and difficult battle. He decided not to limit himself to a simple lawsuit or legal case, but to create a larger campaign not only to address his own personal issue, but also to help others in the community who had experienced discrimination like he had. He wanted to fight not only for his own rights, but for future generations of soldiers, so they would not have to endure what he had gone through. This battle, although not easy, was one that James believed would bring about change, even if only small steps at first. Every step he took would create a larger impact on society, from the airport, from acts of discrimination, and even within the military. A whole generation had sacrificed for their country, and James was determined that they would not only be remembered in silence, but would be recognized for their contributions, not by the color of their skin or any other discrimination, but by their great service to the nation. And so, James began his journey not just for Aaron, but for all the black soldiers who had sacrificed, those who deserved to be respected and acknowledged. Just a week after contacting the group of lawyers, James received a call from his attorney, Caroline Harris. She was one of the leading lawyers in the field of civil rights and anti-racism. She was well-versed in similar cases and had defended many people in situations like James's. "James, we need to prepare well for this case. We will file a lawsuit not only for the discrimination you faced at the airport, but also for the emotional distress they caused you. This is an opportunity for us to make it clear that racism, even in circumstances where it seems impossible, can never be accepted," Caroline said, her voice filled with determination. Her words made James feel like a heavy weight in his heart was gradually being lifted. He began to sense that he was truly stepping into a battle that was more meaningful than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just about personal rights anymore, but about changing society's mindset, about showing that no matter who you are or what color your skin is, everyone deserves to be treated fairly. In the days that followed, James and his team of lawyers worked tirelessly to prepare the case, gather evidence, and develop a legal strategy. Interviews with witnesses from the airport were conducted. They didn't just ask about the incident involving James, but also explored other instances of racial discrimination that had occurred there. This led many others who had previously remained silent to finally speak up about their experiences. The evidence gradually came to light, from incident reports and staff records to video footage showing James being denied. Although James had no intention of seeking fame, he realized that what he was doing could spark a wave of change in the community. This case wasn't simply about James being treated unfairly. It touched on a much broader issue, the deeply ingrained racism that existed in many corners of society, from airports to government agencies. On the day of the first trial, James wasn't sure whether he should feel nervous or proud. He arrived at the courthouse in a well-tailored suit, his face calm, but inside he carried a heavy weight. He knew this wasn't just a simple lawsuit. It was a battle for an entire community. Sometimes, simple acts like standing up for justice could change an entire system. The courtroom was packed. James's comrades, along with Aaron's family, were there to support him. The press was also present, looking at him as a hero, but James was not seeking glory. He only wanted one thing: justice for people like him and for the comrades who had sacrificed for the country. The trial lasted for hours. The airport's defense team presented arguments, attempting to justify the refusal to allow James on the plane. They claimed that security procedures were the main reason and that they were simply following airline regulations. However, Caroline, with her wisdom and skill, pointed out that racism was not just a minor incident. It was part of a system, an invisible yet real force. She argued passionately that this case was a prime example of airport staff not only acting according to protocol, but also carrying unjust biases that influenced their decision, especially in the case of denying James boarding without a reasonable explanation, even when he was on duty escorting the body of a fallen comrade. The witnesses, including airport staff, began to reveal flaws in the procedures they had followed. Other witnesses shared stories of instances where they too had experienced racial discrimination, although these incidents had not been covered by the media. On the third day of the trial, James received surprising news from the airport. They had decided to issue a public apology and agreed to compensate for the emotional distress he had endured. They committed to reforming security procedures, retraining staff on issues related to racial discrimination, and implementing measures to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. Although this was a small victory, James felt that the more important achievement was drawing attention to the issue and beginning to see real change. He felt that he wasn't just fighting for himself, but also for others, those who had silently endured for so long. While the trial ended and the airport incident was resolved, James knew that the battle was not over. But at least now, he could stand tall and be proud of what he had done. He had not remained silent. He had not let injustice persist. Every step he took in this fight held great significance, not just for him, but for all those who had faced discrimination. With this victory, James knew that he had not only helped himself, but also opened a new door for Black soldiers and others who faced discrimination in society. He realized that everyone had the right to speak up and fight for justice, and that was what truly mattered. From here on, James would never forget one thing: change, whether big or small, starts with strong decisions and unwavering action. After the court victory, James felt he had achieved something greater than personal recognition. Although the compensation and public apology from the airport were part of the victory, what made him truly proud was the change in people's awareness, especially in the Black military community and those who had fought for their rights. James knew that his actions, though just a small step, had contributed to clarifying a systemic issue, that racial discrimination had existed for far too long in society and needed to be eradicated. Contrary to his initial expectation that the lawsuit was just a step to achieve justice for himself, James realized that these changes could not come from just one case alone. Black soldiers, those who were dedicating their lives to the country, would continue to endure discrimination, even within institutions that were meant to protect the nation. Although he may have felt some relief after winning the lawsuit, James did not want to stop there. He knew that this battle had only just begun. One early morning, James received a call from Caroline Harris. She informed him that many civil rights organizations and anti-racism communities had reached out and wanted to collaborate with him to push forward a campaign against racial discrimination in the military and government agencies. James, this is the time for us to truly make a difference. Struggles like yours will not stop in the courtroom. We need to do something more long-term, a larger campaign to help people like you and other soldiers who have been discriminated against within the system, Caroline said with determination in her voice. With the support of Caroline and civil rights organizations, James began participating in a series of awareness-raising campaigns, from organizing workshops and community meetings to collaborating with influential figures to call for change. Every time he spoke on this issue, he emphasized that it was not just a personal lawsuit, but a call for comprehensive societal change. One of the notable results from James's campaign was the reform in the military and security agencies. Training sessions on racism and cultural sensitivity began to be implemented more widely. The United States military, which brought together soldiers from diverse backgrounds, introduced new training programs to create a more inclusive work environment for everyone. At the same time, airports nationwide also began to change their procedures. They organized training sessions on how to recognize and handle racial discrimination and implemented measures for monitoring to ensure that discriminatory behaviors would no longer be tolerated. This change was not just legal, but also a shift in the mindset of those in charge of these agencies. At the same time, James realized that he had become a symbol for the fight against racism, not only in the military, but also in society at large. His story was widely shared, from television interviews to newspaper articles. He became a role model for those who had been discriminated against and overlooked, but refused to remain silent. However, James was not seeking personal glory. What he was doing was not for fame, but for a larger goal, for every soldier, regardless of their skin color, to be respected as true heroes. He also did not forget that this battle was far from over. Not long ago, he had been in court fighting for justice for himself. But now, he knew he was fighting not only for himself, but for future generations of soldiers. Throughout this journey, he remained confident that though slow, change would come. James Blackwood was not just a soldier. He was a fighter for justice, a pioneer in a quiet but powerful revolution. His journey was not just about reclaiming his rights, but also about leaving a mark in the long struggle against racism, not just in the military, but in society as a whole. And when he looked back on everything that had happened, James understood that what he had achieved was not just a victory over an organization or an agency, but a victory for righteousness, for the noble values of humanity. He had, and was continuing to, build a legacy, the legacy of a brave soldier, fighting not only on the battlefield, but also in the hearts and minds of every American citizen. The change James initiated would live on, not only for soldiers, but for anyone who believes in justice, fairness, and respect for all people. Thank you all for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the best stories. See you in the next one.